with the very same quote from David Attenborough above.
Good.
But whereas Attenborough only sees the wisdom horizon as something that's got to be taken seriously, Gurdjieff plunges in. What she is doing is trying to get wisdom by valuing science completely, but understanding its limits, while at the same time embracing the equal importance of feeling, the arts, and personal relationship. I found it a very moving book. Her struggle has been to re-find faith in humanity, knowing what she knows as a scientist in the face of indifferent politicians and blatantly self-interested fossil fuel industries. Her great contribution, I think, that builds on Attenborough, is to help us shift the issue not just into a scientific one, but a cultural one, something that is involved in every aspect of our life. Then another book that came out at the end of last year, and this is possibly one of the most important books that's been published in some years, The Matter with Things. Not the things that matter, but the matter with things. And subtitled Our Brains, Our Delusions and the Unmaking of the World by Ian McGilchrist. 2 volumes. I'm only partway through the first. I think this is a genuinely important book because he's standing back and saying, in effect, that science is an extraordinary achievement of us human beings, but it is not enough because we have a whole lot more going on within us other than our attempt to know the world scientifically. And we have to pay as much attention to that to know who we are as we do and assume with a scientific view. This is a direct quote from McGilchrist to highlight what I'm saying. Science can never be merely the extension of technique, as it often now seems to be. Knowing how to do something is not the same as understanding it. Expanding know-how, our power to control exponentially, without any concomitant advance in wisdom is dangerous. It's like putting machine guns in the hands of toddlers. In 1991, Jonas Salk, who developed the polio vaccine, said, "At one time we had wisdom, but little knowledge. Now we have a great deal of knowledge, but do we have enough wisdom to deal with that knowledge?" What Salk is hinting at here is something that I think is really important for us to try and work with. And that is the understanding that primitive man, still present in some Indigenous communities, actually had a felt relationship with the natural world around them. A felt relationship. And that feeling relationship carried with it life force and energy that actually contributed to their knowing how best to act in any given situation. But what's happened for our world is that we came to believe that to have true knowledge, we had to make it rational, and we had to have very clear logic between the concepts. Best embodied, I guess, in the whole Enlightenment, which had such a deep effect on our culture, and then eventually around the world. And in that, we no longer participate so much emotionally and feelingly in the world around us. We actually stand back and observe it, come up with a theory, test it, whatever, abstract it. Yes, that works. The maths goes, act, change. So you see, there's been a creeping separation going on in our psyches since the rise of modern science and the Enlightenment, that it has actually decreased our wisdom but increased our knowledge. And I think that's what Salk is getting at here. And then a final book as an introduction is this book by Karen Armstrong. Now, Karen Armstrong is a very interesting person. She was a nun in a Catholic order, left the order and became interested in the academic study of theology, but then also anthropology and religion, and has written a whole series of books. The first one, I think, there was a bestseller, was called A History of God. And this is her latest, published this year. Sacred Nature, How We Can Recover Our Bond with the Natural World. Now, the implication of it for Karen Armstrong is that if we want to get serious about wisdom, it's that bond with the natural world that we have to work at re-establishing. Now, I put it to you, for a lot of people, they would have no idea what that means because we are so removed from it emotionally. Heavens, we move mountains. We don't talk to mountains. We chop anything down that can be chopped. The ancients didn't do that. They talked to the mountain. They talked to the tree. They did things that us moderns think is ridiculous. But they actually felt emotional connection with whatever they addressed personally. So this is from the back cover. In this hugely powerful book, Karen Armstrong argues that if we want to avert environmental catastrophe, it's not enough to change our behaviour. We need to learn to think and feel differently about the natural world, to rekindle our spiritual bond with nature. For most of human history and in almost all the world's cultures, nature was believed to be sacred, and our God or gods to be present everywhere in the natural world. And when people in the West began to separate God and nature in modern times, it was not just a profound breach with thousands of years of accumulated wisdom, it also set in train the destruction of the natural world. Well, I'll be interested to know what you think of all that. Of course, Karen Armstrong and Ian McGilchrist and others are not the first to be aware that some very profound change was happening in our culture as we became more wedded to a logical, scientific, rational understanding of the world around us. And of course, it's a major theme in the Romantic poets. Just about all of them have poems directly related to this increasing separation in our culture between ourselves as persons and the impersonal world as was being increasingly seen of the world around us. This is a famous one by William Wordsworth, perhaps the greatest of the English Romantic poets. The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We've given our hearts away, a sordid boon. The sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours, and our upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. Great God, I'd rather be a pagan, suckled in a creed outworn, So might I, standing on this pleasant lea, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. For me, Wordsworth is picking up something that Karen Armstrong actually deals with at some length. And that is that it's not only science that has made this cleavage between our emotional and spiritual life and the world around us that we insist on seeing only as matter. So has the doctrines of the Christian Church. Because when creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, became the accepted doctrine, what it did for our view of God was to completely separate God from creation. And creation became like clay. And then we, to some degree, identify with God, so we stand back over and against the created order as well. I think Wordsworth is picking that up here and is saying, no, that in a way, I, as a Christian man, would somehow love to have a bit of the old pagan life, because that somehow was more in touch with and connected with emotionally and spiritually with nature. But of course, what's going on in the world is not just about our relationship with the environment and the horrific future that we're increasingly warned about. It's also about the geopolitical situation as well. And I guess the next few years are going to be incredibly important in that regard. And so the other poem that comes to mind when I think of the possibility of Trump being re-elected, forgive me, sponsors, is this first verse from W.B. Yeats' great poem, The Second Coming. I understand from Wikipedia that this is now the most referenced poem in the English language. And I hope you've read it recently. It's worth a good read. This is the first verse. My daughter can say it off by heart. This is my daughter here. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. I really became interested in these things when I went to study in Birmingham at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. It was a time that introduced me to a much wider reading, and I was lucky to have a tutor who encouraged me greatly on this, and he would put books in my hands and say, go and read it. And what got me really thinking about our whole relationship with the world around us really began when I was out in the English countryside and I was climbing over an old-fashioned stile. And as I climbed over the stile and I was about to put my foot on the ground, I saw a frog. And I immediately moved my leg to the side so I wouldn't step on the frog. And I did move my leg to the side and I didn't step on the frog. The only problem was that when I went back and looked, it wasn't a frog at all, it was a dead leaf. But I had seen a frog. I had seen a frog. Luckily, at the time I was reading the writer Gregory Bateson, who some people think was one of the great polymaths of the 20th century. And the book that I was reading had just been published called Mind and Nature, Necessary Unity. And he had this paragraph in it, which really hammered home the significance of my experience. Experience of the exterior is always mediated by particular sense organs and neural pathways. To that extent, objects are my creation, and my experience of them is subjective, not objective. It is, however, not a trivial assertion to note that very few persons, at least in Occidental culture, doubt the objectivity of such sense data as pain and their visual images of the external world. Our civilization is deeply based on this illusion. It wasn't once. Once we understood soul, and we understood that we actually make the experience that we experience out of the data that comes through our senses. Our culture no longer knows that in any general sense. It believes we experience matter, the world out there, immediately and directly. That's an illusion. So I'm looking at you all here now, and what I've come to accept, in that sense know, is that I'm actually interpreting the information coming through my senses and making the image then that I'm experiencing. You probably know all that. You probably know all that. Most people don't. And that's why he's saying we're built, our civilization is deeply based on this illusion. Well, more recently, I was reading a lecture by Sir Arthur Eddington. Arthur Eddington was one of the great early physicists of the relativity period. In fact, he was the first translator of Einstein into English. And he gave a very important lecture in 1928, where he went further and suggested that it's not just an illusion that our civilization is based on, it's a delusion. This is a direct quote. We all share the strange delusion that a lump of matter is something whose general nature is easily comprehensible, whereas the nature of the human spirit is unfathomable. In comparing the certainty of these things spiritual and things temporal, let us not forget this. Mind is the first and most direct thing in our experience. All else is remote inference. I've written there, let that sink in. What I found is that it's very hard for people to let that sink in. And I think that that's a cultural issue where we're so convinced that we understand matter. But no one understands matter. We think we understand gravity. Newton said, I don't understand gravity. I've just given it a mathematical position in a formula and it all works. Why worry about what it is intrinsically if the maths works? So I'm hoping I'm getting something over, because I think this is a really, really fundamentally important point for our culture. And part of my delight in being able to speak tonight is to try and find ways to talk about it so the penny drops. So mind is the first and most direct thing in our experience. All else is remote inference. And this inference can be an immediate intuition, like our perceptions of each other. that we trust. And once we trust what we see, we act towards it as if it's really there. I'll be talking about some experiments that really stuff that up for people. Or the inference might be a vastly complex construct that a whole society believes, particularly if there's evidence also in our phenomenal or empirical world. So in the matter of perception, a man called Archibald Ames, and this was written up by Gregory Bateson in some detail, and this is where I first really started to grapple with this. He set up experiments whereby he sought to fool what you saw of the world around you. So you thought something was there, but when you went there, it wasn't there. You thought you heard a bird. Oh, over here. There's no bird. What he tried to do was to show, let people have the experience that they do make inferences from the data that is coming through their senses. Probably the neuroscientist that popularized this understanding most was Oliver Sacks, and some of you may well have read some of his books. One of them that particularly affected me was called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And it's this world of neuroscience that Ian McGilchrist particularly deals with. And he gives a great deal of information of how either something happens to one or other side of the brain, which then totally affects the way you actually can perceive the world around you. He goes into that in great detail. Then, with the projection of a vastly complex construct, I guess the classic example is matter. You know, we didn't think about matter until the rise of modern science. Aristotle referred to matter, but what he meant by matter was something quite different. It was only when the early scientists, and particularly Galileo, went back to the Greek philosopher Democritus and saw that if we could think that everything around us is made up of little atoms, that might affect the way we're able to look at it and construct knowledge from it. And that's exactly what's happened. And there has been empirical evidence for a lot of the work at that level. But we don't stop at atoms now, of course, we go into subatomic particles. And when we get to the subatomic particles, to the quantum level, very strange things happen. All the Newtonian laws break down. And in fact, existence seems to depend on someone observing something. And when someone observes something, a wave turns into a particle, etc. All these now have some degree of empirical verification, so they have become a legitimate part of our collective representations in our culture. But an interesting one is now dark energy and dark matter. Dark energy and dark matter are entirely theoretical ideas. They're only present because they're needed in the mathematics of the cosmology of the cosmos at that level. The hope is that one day, and maybe one day soon, there'll be some degree of empirical evidence that those theoretical ideas are really real. They're not just a theoretical idea. And the famous one in our lifetime, of course, is the Higgs boson. You've all heard of the Higgs boson? Yeah. Well, the Higgs was a theoretical idea put up through mathematics by Peter Higgs. And it was thought that if this could be shown to really exist and not just be a theoretical existence, well, then that would make the standard understanding of quantum mechanics all the stronger and more to be accepted and believed. And in 2012, it was decided by the physical science community that there was now empirical evidence of the Higgs boson. But don't think it was a great flash of lightning or anything like that. It was a little blip on a graph. But that's been enough to persuade that community that it's empirically verified. And then there's the knowledge that we have of each other. The scientific knowledge is what we call extrinsic knowledge. But when we know another person, we're now starting to move inside ourselves into intrinsic knowledge. It's like saying, do you know Bill Smith? Now, you may know absolutely nothing about Bill Smith, really, but you met him and you thought he was a jolly nice bloke. And you have a sense of knowing him. And it's a genuine knowledge. It's a personal knowledge. And so they say, oh, yeah, I know him. I met him down to such and such and such. And we will carry images of that person or that thing in us internally, which then become part of our thinking. That's how intrinsic knowledge works. And when we start to think like this, well, then God takes on a completely different meaning and understanding. Because just as subatomic particles or dark matter are inferences from experience, so is God. So all our experience is mental, inferences from data coming through our senses and from within ourselves. In everyday experience, our sight is the dominant sense. However, the most fundamental sense is touch when we are resisted. I wish I could spend more time on developing that. What actually exists apart from our direct mental experience might in the end be unknowable, and that's what the great philosopher Immanuel Kant believed. But otherwise we conjecture, and this is where ideas like gravity and matter come from. They each are theoretical concepts that have some empirical backing. So is the God idea. This is the world of objective, extrinsic knowledge. This is the world of science. And theology, of course, likes to see itself in that world, but it turns God into an object. We are creatures that can mentally infer an external world from the data coming in through our senses and project complex ideas onto the universe, but at the same time also have a sense of our own selfhood and inner life. This suggests a mental complexity of the highest order in inferring the depths of our inner life, at least as important as our capacity to project complex ideas about the external world. We can know the ourselves and the world from the world from inside as well, intrinsic knowledge, and this is the world of wisdom, personal knowledge. Well, I need to maybe just cut right to the quick here. Where the work of McGilchrist is particularly helpful is that he's able to bring the inside knowledge that we have within our experience and our outside knowledge, the objective knowledge we have in science, right down to the very structure of our brain. And so a major part of his work is to reinvigorate what was quite popular back in the 70s and 80s, and that is that our brain is bicameral, that the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere have different functions in determining the experience of the world around us. How many of you are aware of the two hemispheres? Yeah. Yeah, okay. So the right hemisphere is the hemisphere of creativity, intuition, the arts, creation, feeling, imagination. And the left is of analysis and logic and ideas and facts and maths and training. The very first book he wrote was called The Master and the Emissary. And the basis of his thesis is that in our culture now, the emissary, which is the left brain, the brain that's interested in the logical apprehension of the world around us, has usurped the position of the right hemisphere, which is the master. And he got that title from a parable that Nietzsche apparently used to talk about, where there was a master and he had emissaries, and he sent the emissaries out to his kingdom and to look after things. And one of them got very smart and decided he would usurp the master and take over the kingdom. And what he's saying there is that the left brain in our culture now has taken over the right brain, the functions of the right brain. And that's why we have this incredible disjunction now between ourselves and the natural world. Maybe it can be recovered if we appreciate that we need to rediscover the all-importance of wisdom. So just a few quick things about wisdom itself. It's seeing things clearly, seeing things as they are, acting in prudent and effective ways. And these next two, to me, are the most important. Making decisions with the well-being of the whole in mind. What scientific knowledge tends to do is to analyze everything into parts and then try to understand it from that. What wisdom does is try to see it from the whole and put the whole first. And then deeply understanding the human and cosmic situation, mankind's experience and human nature. Knowing when to act and when not to. Being able to handle whatever arises with equanimity and to deal with such issues in a compassionate and holistic way. And being able to anticipate potential problems and avoid them. So what I'm saying is that I believe we have to put now in our culture, and I'll put my own little paddle in as best I can, as much energy and resources into our intrinsic knowledge as our extrinsic, that is our inner knowledge and wisdom, as our scientific knowledge. But we cannot do it scientifically only. We have to do it from the inside as well. And this is where Jung and others are so important. How can we begin to work first with wholes in our everyday life? Well, firstly, let's think about space. The evolution of our consciousness of space has been very dramatic. Now, from the biblical three-tiered universe to that. That's one of the most famous photographs in the world. It was the first photograph taken from one of the Apollos circling the moon, Earth rising at Christmas. We're now quite used to pictures of the planet suspended in the cosmos. Where this is, to me, such an important whole came when I picked up my youngest daughter years ago from primary school. And she said, as I drove her home, "Daddy, we had pictures from outer space today. And we looked down on the planet Earth. And I had this very funny feeling that I was down there somewhere running around." And I went, wow. She was able to see herself as a part of this extraordinary whole that is our gorgeous planet. So in developing the idea of wisdom circles, I've put the planet in the center of the circle. Because that's now what we intuitively have the sense of when we think about space. And then time. The evolution of our consciousness of time has also been dramatic, from biblical time to cosmic time. From 4,004 years under Bishop Ussher's analysis of the Bible to 13.8 billion under the current understanding of when the Big Bang might have occurred. And black holes now are not just theoretical, they're accepted, they're believed to be photographed. That's the empirical evidence that they wanted. And now they're going to be more and more a major element of our understanding of the universe that we're in. And that dear man, the physicist who's escaped my mind, that's in Australia again now, talks on the ABC. Brian Cox, thank you. I turned 80 the other day. Brian Cox said the other day on television that when we look into a black hole, we're looking at the end of time. Completely different consciousness now of time. And the question in my mind, well, are black holes also the beginning of time? And it's much, much harder then to represent not only space and our change to changing consciousness of space, much harder to then think of our existence over time. But these two diagrams sort of touch it, and there's a bit of sort of a black hole going on in here, isn't there? I'm not sure I'd like to fall in there. And here you get the sort of the curvature of space, time. And it's within this space-time that we have evolved as embodied mind. Consciousness upon a vast and deep unconscious. And part of what I think has to happen is that that has to become an idea that we don't just think about cognitively, but we feel deeply and emotionally. And this diagram, to some sense, begins to pick that up. So here you can't see because of the distortion, but here are all the different ages that the evolution of the species has gone through. And you can actually see where it's a proper focus, you can see some dinosaurs and other creatures and so forth. The sense that the whole of the human race, the whole of our evolutionary story is in us, internally, as well as our bodies. And this was the famous quote from a little book by Hall and Nordby that really then became a major part of my thesis about Christ. The mind of man is prefigured by evolution. Thus, the individual is linked with his past, not only with the past of his infancy, but more importantly, with the past of the species. And before that, with the long stretch of organic evolution. This placing of the psyche within the evolutionary process was Jung's preeminent achievement. Now, just as a footnote, if the panpsychists, and by the way, panpsychism is making a very big comeback, mainly because this whole thing between matter and consciousness is now the great frontier of both science and philosophy. And so panpsychism is making quite a comeback. We're believing that the whole of the world around us is also psychic. The panpsychists or the religious idealists are right, perhaps very primitive in awareness goes back further than the beginning of organic life, even just after the great nothingness full of potential. That's one of the many Clayton words for God that are around now. And that particular one was by David Christian who writes about big history. So to wrap up very quickly, we really are, all of us, microcosms of the macrocosm, holes within holes. This was believed before the rise of modern science and the Enlightenment, and then got rubbished. It's making a comeback, and I believe that any good Jungian should be well and truly behind making its comeback. It means then we can identify or role reverse with the whole, with God, or with the smallest part of ourselves or the universe. And this is the measure of our imagination and intuition, which kindle wisdom and insight. So we've been, certainly as a Western culture, but I think all cultures of the world now are implicated in it. We've had such a belief that science is enough to get us out of any trouble. We now are realizing that's probably not the case. And unless we find another way of seeing the world, we're going to fall off the end. Or we can refine the other end of the continuum in what we can think of as wisdom and accept its evolution in the evolution of the psyche. This is the inner psychic story of our physical evolution. Now, Jung was only one attempt at this, very important. And I was very interested to read that he expected that what he had started in his work would continue. And I guess to some degree it has, but in other ways it's become sort of solidified as Jung's ideas over here. But there's stuff there to develop, I think, but it's going to need a lot more than just straight intellectual engagement. It's going to need the engagement of our imagination, of our capacity to attend to things, to develop what he laid down. It's about understanding better attention, intuition, imagination, metaphor, image, symbol, at least as well as electrons, electromagnetic waves, and artificial intelligence. All these other ones we take for granted, but we can no longer take them for granted. We have to understand them better and develop our understanding of them to create a balance to the externalized world of science. Now, lots of things are happening, and something came to light recently which I think illustrates just that. And this is a book written by one of my daughter's best friends. Do you want to meet your grandma? Here we are. Would you like to meet your grandma from 7 million years ago? Do you want to see what she was like? Would you really like to know? Well, go on then, turn the page. That's my grandma. But she's got hair from head to foot. Well, that's what we needed 7 million years ago. Here are some of her other grandkids. Do you feel her when you climb at the top of the tree? Do you feel her? Feel the bark under your fingers and the thrill of being free. Do you feel her in the love of your family and your friends? Or the fights and games and tears and laughs that never seem to end? And so we go, right through to, wait for it, whoa, my grandma was a star. I came from a star. How can that be? Well, when she exploded, she made all our matter. And that's what you're made of, the stardust that she scattered. And the point about this is that here's a kid's book, no longer trying to give a sense of the unity of all things by looking at the sky and thinking about a sky god, but actually looking at our past and our origins that we carry psychically within us and say, what we need to reconnect with nature is already in us. What we have to do is engage in the activities that will bring that to life. And that's one of the major things I'm doing with myself at the moment, is trying to reconnect emotionally and spiritually with the immediate world around me. And sometimes it works. And the effect on how I'm thinking and feeling is quite remarkable. And then I mentioned J.L. Marino before. One of the great things about Marino was that he totally embraced the importance of imagination in life. And I think to find this reconnection that will help us to be wiser, we're going to need a lot of capacity to imagine. Here set out, and Robert slightly in the way, I'll go. This is a wisdom circle. Here we are. Wisdom circle of the mind. Here we're looking. Now, we could be a council from God, looking down on the planet Earth and saying, what did it say? And we could even there's a north, south, east, and west. And so if we start to look at the whole, all of these different positions, we're beginning to get different perspectives on the issue. And that's going to awaken some other aspect within us that's already there through our evolutionary species. But that's one of the ideas that I wanted to develop. Just see where that happens. And finally, I mentioned clean language. This is a particular modality that my wife Angela and I engage at the moment. And where it's so important is that it understands that the language of the unconscious is not just concepts that Jung tried to be quite clear about in the archetypes and so forth. It's about developing our capacity to attend to something. Very important. McGilchrist has a lot to say about that. Our intuitions, learning to trust them more. Our imagination. Metaphor. You know, metaphor is the language of the unconscious. We're using metaphor all the time, but we completely take them for granted. When you stop taking them for granted, it actually opens up what's going on inside us at some deeper level of our psyche. Image and symbol, and of course they were issues that Jung dealt with a lot. So I'm hoping that as I continue to work on develop the idea of the wisdom circle, that there might be something here, a little contribution to this incredible need that we have to be much wiser than we are with all the knowledge that we have. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. You've given us so much to think about. And I like the wisdom circle. I think I might use that in my teaching and do that with young children.
I think have a wisdom circle with kids.
Yeah.
Get them used to that idea of looking
I think it's excellent.
at this incredible whole that we live
Of
on,
the world.
that we're destroying. Get them used to thinking about it from every perspective, I think would be a real contribution to developing.
It's an excellent idea. Oh, I like it. Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And thank you very much for tonight. You've given us so much to think about. We'll go home and have to read all those books. We're going to be keeping really busy. The next time we'll have to invite you again to see how we're going with the wisdom circle. Thank you. And I'd like to suggest that we all go and have a cup of tea when we could think a bit more about the wisdom circle. And there's cups of tea in here in the kitchen, and there's a lovely supper up here. And we'd like you to enjoy that. And we'll have about 15 minutes, 10 minutes to see how we go. And then we can come back and ask all the questions. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and Tricia's contribution, and also our beautiful man over here that supplies the music and everything else. Thank you. And thank you, David, again. And thank you to Angela.
But one of the themes that occurred to me as you were speaking was the concept of purpose. That is the sense that we have some sort of a direction, that we can imagine God as the highest telos of, or the purpose of our life, and that sense of purpose has been lost by the calculative culture, and that we need to cultivate a more contemplative culture that can gain a sense of our direction and purpose and meaning.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's all about really thinking about who we are and why we're here, and what might lie beyond it. That's the sort of thing I mean.
Sure, and so with your placement of our planetary globe in the as the focus of the wisdom circle, it encourages us to think about the whole, as you were saying, and that's really one of Jung's key themes, just holistic thinking.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I find really interesting is saying we have evolved within the context of the solar system, and the solar system, like the sun and the planets are part of our DNA as much as our planet Earth, in a sense. And yet our solar system is extremely isolated within the galaxy. And so thinking of that sort of a concept as like there are various units of the whole that we can take. We can take the whole planet, the whole solar system, the whole universe.
Yeah. And I think part of the deal in the widening of consciousness is our capacity then to place ourselves at different parts of the universe and think about it from there. I mean, that's basically how planet Earth stopped being the center of the universe. It was because Copernicus could actually think about what he observed from the point of view of the sun. Einstein thought about the universe from the point of view of traveling at the speed of light. Incredible feats of imagination. They lie behind science as much as I'm suggesting imagination needs to lie behind how we can take wisdom seriously and actually consciously develop our capacity for wisdom. And that's, I suppose, what I'm wanting to explore more formally in a wisdom center.
So there was that sense of a second Copernican revolution from Kant of taking our subjective consciousness as the framework for the construction of meaning.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So these ideas that you're describing have been out there. I mean, my interest is in the philosopher Martin Heidegger, and his key idea in Being and Time, in terms of the meaning of being in the world, was to say care is the meaning of being.
Yes.
And I think that it's a really profound way of approaching wisdom, to say care, that we have a relational ontology. You know, we don't relate to things as isolated subject, looking at objective matter. We relate in terms of care.
Yeah. I think Heidegger's having a bit of a renewal as well. In fact, the whole world of phenomenology, I think. How it is that we actually think, what's going on, becoming more aware of that process. I think that's of great significance for the whole idea of the development of wisdom. Becoming much more aware of the flow of our consciousness and what comes what. And my belief is that there's much more metaphor embedded in our everyday speech than we realise. If we could only become more aware of metaphor that we're using, we're actually going to open a lot more of our unconscious in the flow of consciousness.
It certainly does. And I thought it was really fascinating. I'm happy to hand on the mic to somebody else if they want it, but I'll just raise one other point. Your conversation about God, in which you were saying that Christendom sort of objectified God in quite a degraded way. Yeah. And if we can get back to thinking of God in a more humble way, perhaps as metaphor, rather than, saying we've solved the mystery of God or something like that.
Yeah. Yes. God for me is this particular energy that I feel. And that goes back to my original experiences. So the concept that I'm happiest with is the concept of spirit. I'm very keen to give a coherent account of spirit, both our individual spirits, but also the spirit that is God. Because I think that that's really the heart. But God is not an object. He's
or a person? Is God a person?
God is entirely personal.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And you see, one of the great contributions of Indigenous culture that I believe, need to be really pursuing a lot more directly is the fact that they do see the world around them in personal terms. We've made it impersonal and withdrawn from it, objectified it, made it all matter. But the Indigenous doesn't. The Indigenous person talks to the mountain, talks to the tree. There's a sense, and you were raising about the importance of relationships. I mean, that's exactly right. It's all about relationship. We only have a selfhood in relationship to someone else. And we can have a sense of self in relation to a sacred place, another person, the pet dog.
You were saying about the universe being... Is that better? Is that better? And anyway, you were talking about the universe being reflected inside of us. So wouldn't it be better, instead of looking for God outside of yourself and looking into the earth kind of thing, wouldn't it be better to be going inside yourself and looking for the oneness or the or that is in within yourself?
Totally. And to me, there's a black hole inside each of us.
We are extensions of the blackness. Yeah. Well, it's only dark because we haven't got the wherewithal, the intelligence to know it.
Well, true. Yeah, intelligence. Yeah, sure. Let's have as much as we can get.
Or awareness.
We need more than that. See, Jung's vision was that our psyche is evolved in an evolutionary fashion, and so therefore it's layered, and it goes right down to. He said it comes out at the bottom into carbon, into inorganic life.
Yeah.
And that to me is like saying, down inside, deep within me, is the start of life.
It is your soul, and what's your soul made of?
Well, the whole story is my soul.
Mm-hmm.
The whole story of how we got here, the internal story of our psyches, is in each one.
Mm-hmm. And there's a few organisations within the world that have kind of stifled the Earth's progress over the last few thousand years. Do you think mankind, I mean, every generation our IQ gets a bit more, gets a bit better. Do you think we've developed to a place now where the younger generation have got a better IQ to having a bit of an awakening and overcome these organisations that kind of try to stifle the world?
Well, let's hope that's the case. I mean, certainly young people think very differently from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a great thing.
Mm-hmm. And the Big Bang Theory has been disproved already. So
Sorry?
the Big Bang Theory has been disproved already.
Well, probably several times. We'll live on a long while. Because I didn't go into this idea of collective representation. See, one of the things that MacKillop has really helped me with is that the right side of the brain actually experiences the appearance of something, the presence of something. I'm picking up your presences, and you all have a different presence. But then I think about that, and when I think about it, I represent it to myself. That makes sense?
Wouldn't you have to honour the sovereignty of all the different beings that are here? I mean, we're all sovereign beings, and yet we are part of the one kind of thing. So as your perception of things grow, you can see, or as it broadens, you have a greater grasp of the truth.
Yes.
And as your grasp of the truth becomes greater, then your wisdom becomes greater. So,
absolutely. I had an experience the other day. I've had several. They're very, very precious to me. I was passing a little garden, and I was thinking about just taking in the presence of everything.
mm-hmm.
And then it started to happen. And I started to experience the plants personally.
A oneness.
And part of it was I stopped thinking about them. I just let them relate to me. And what happened was I started to see every plant as an individual. And it was just extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, so I stopped classifying. I stopped saying that's such and such a plant, whatever. I just let their presence touch me,
Mm-hmm.
and each part was an individual. And I could see something in it, and it stirred little movements of life within me. So the outer dancing of the plants somehow became an inner dancing again. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the most beautiful experience. And I think a lot of people had that, but never made it. Never stopped to say, oh, how extraordinary. Isn't that beautiful? That's energizing me. That movement of the wind and the trees and the leaves is actually creating a movement in me. And I think that's what Jesus was talking about. He talked about the spirit is like the wind and the trees.
Well, as you go inside and discover the inner view, it becomes even more amazing.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I'm just interested that you referenced Merino, and I'm wondering if you could just give a quick take, or your take, on how psychodrama fits in with all of this.
Well, I'm in the presence of a qualified psychodramatist, so I've got to be very careful. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
My wife is. To me, Merino did what someone like you probably would never do. He dared to say, I'm a human being and I can empathize with the world around me. I can actually walk in the shoes of anyone if I allow myself to, even the shoes of God. So he didn't hesitate to roll with it. You obviously know something about psychodrama. And one of the things that you do that I'm hoping to introduce into the wisdom circle is that you reverse roles with someone. You start to
That-
actually be the other person.
That was indeed the part of psychodrama that resonated with me. And I guess the question was, so, well, yeah, am I on the right track there? Because I think that reversing roles is indeed, you know, becoming the other.
Becoming the other. And so in psychodrama, you reverse roles with the tree. And the staggering thing is that when you do, you actually come up with new insights from the perspective of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
And you had no idea that that was in you, but it was. And suddenly you come out with it. And there is out there now an active part of your consciousness, a sense of insight from being the tree. And you can do that with God. You can do that with anyone. And it's that level of imagination that I think is really required to be developed. And I was really interested to talk with Jean because it's with children. Children can lap this up quickly. You know, they can be just a grumpy man next door. And they're actually feeling inside themselves something about that man. They've got knowledge of it, intrinsic knowledge. Yeah,
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we're hogging this over this side.
Yes, I do apologise. Thank you so much, David, for the care and attention and the time you've given us tonight. Nikolai Blasko is my name, and I'm with the Centre for Christianity and Culture. And I'm also teaching at Narrabundah at the moment, full-time literature for 8 weeks, full on 5 classes. And I can assure you that the young people that are coming up are very hungry for wisdom. So for wisdom, yeah. So I was just wanting to ask you, I noticed that Graham Garrett, Dr. Graham Garrett and Jan have been doing a lot of work along this line of listening, and talking to the environment, and you probably may have read their book. And there are people like Ilia Delio, and I've just picked up her book recently. She's a Franciscan sister, and she's following Teilhard de Chardin line of thinking. And there's some very exciting things happening, but it seems to me that there are little pockets of people like yourself and others, Graham and Jan, working away. And I'm excited by the possibility that somehow all of this work that's going on in small kind of centers can expand out and join forces, because there really is something. We're on the verge of a real move forward, and I wondered, would you consider doing that kind of collaborative work with Ilia Delio or with the Teilhard de Chardin? Yes, I'm sure you would, I'm sure, yeah.
I wasn't aware that Graham, I haven't had anything to do with Graham for years, but we were on staff together sometimes. But I'm interested to know what he's up to. Thank you. This could be a curveball.
No, it's not. As you were talking, I was thinking that what you're talking about, Indigenous Australia talks about as connection to country. And I think we live in a country that this kind of knowledge has been here for 60, 70,000, 100,000 years. And I think we're lucky because we do have that knowledge around us. And I was thinking about how we do the acknowledgement of country and how, as white Australians, that is us trying to tap into that connection, but it's doing it from the left-hand side of the brain because we're using words and we're not actually connecting to that country. So to connect to country from the right-hand side of the brain is a really different thing. And I had that thought as you were.
Thank you very much.
You mentioned one of your current projects is setting up wisdom circles. Are you able to say much about what that involves?
Well, it only started this year. And held about 5, I think. what I've realised is that I need to get a better handle on the possible theoretical view. of what I'm trying to do. So I'm wanting to complete the writing I'm doing at the moment. But I hope next year to set up a bit of an experimental group, to have 4 or 5 other people who will consciously work with my ideas as a sort of pilot.
Yeah. Would that happen in Canberra?
Well, probably not. Centre of the universe.
Let's choose this kind of. You'll have to go then.
Yes, Jeff, you'd be most welcome anytime.
There were all Canberrans when we go down the coast.
With jars and homemade chairs.
So
So wisdom is something we accumulate over many years, maybe even a lifetime. So how do you propose to have a wisdom group when I mean, wisdom is something we accumulate over a lifetime from much knowledge and just experience and that sort of thing. So is it a sharing of knowledge, kind of like a cognitive therapy session? You kind of bringing out aspects or bring up knowledge so that everyone can sort of put together after many sessions a particular wisdom.
I think part of it is coming to believe that we probably know a lot more than we realise we know. This is not old, it's an ancient idea. That knowledge in a way is a remembering. And that's in us now. Of course, we are microcosms. So developing those ideas and thoughts so that they become more intuitive in us, and then having something where you're actually intentionally wanting to put yourself in a place. See, I'm looking at Africa. What can I say about Africa? It's not just head knowledge; it's starting to feel into that.
So it's kind of entering into a trance state and going into your own subconscious or unconscious.
It's being learning to listen to the flow of our consciousness more closely, recognizing the sorts of metaphorical language it uses, and being able to know how to. That's the sort of idea.
So this is like a flotation tank.
Oh, that's a lovely metaphor.
Sort of
Resting back,
finding complete relaxation and
listening.
and entering your inner
Eureka!
knowing.
Yes, it's playing around with those.
And then sharing that knowledge and developing the wisdom within the group.
David, I had a further question about your relationship with the Christian Church, because from what you've said, there's quite a tension between the wisdom tradition within the Gospels and the Scriptures, and how more superficial political traditions have corrupted the use of those texts. That's seemed to be something I was inferring from what you were describing, and so so you've got that question: is Christianity and the Christian Church a repository of wisdom, and how does it handle that? Where do you find wisdom within this gospel traditions?
Well, that's a really big question. Thank you. I mentioned Karen Armstrong's book, Sacred Nature. she dares to raise some of these issues. To me, she doesn't take it any far enough. For me, in the end, it's all bound up in Christ. That's why I want to see us celebrating Christ in the 21st century. Not as the church does, as individuals who see the Spirit, who experience the Spirit. It's a big topic to go on and on about it. Part of the tension is that we've tended to make, in the Christian tradition, we've never really developed the idea of God as Spirit. It was a tack on from the beginning. And what we've tended to do is to see God as an object in theology. Formal theology definitely made God an object that you try to think about, rather than an energy you allow yourself to experience. That to me is the fundamental difference. And so thinking of God as an object tends then to put you into that sort of scientific mode where you withdraw and attempt to analyze and have concepts, and the more rational and logical they are, the more you believe they're probably true. That's the whole story of theology. Whereas what we haven't done is learn to actually engage the life force of God, the Spirit of God. Is that making sense? And that to me is much more connecting with nature. So to me, the biggest problem for the church has been that in withdrawing from nature and seeing God as this working the clay, has then made the idea of incarnation the second person of the Trinity, leaving his throne in heaven and coming in and visiting the earth, rather than everything in creation is a measure of the incarnation of God. Now, there are a lot of thinkers that are thinking more along that line. And then, when you think that way, Christ becomes the chief focal point of the evolution of the species. Is that making sense?
Yeah, completely. I think that's very deep. Thank you, David.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's a bit like saying, we think of God as an entity or a thing, but that's just really, it's like a wrong epistemology to start off with. And if we say only things are real, then we're coming from a really degraded perspective when we need to be having metaphor and spirit and allegory.
And realizing the reality behind them. Yeah, thanks. And one of the problems is that the spirit can get out of control quite quickly, and that was part of the dilemma of the church. So people have extraordinary experiences of energy, life. And of course, it's a bit like the story of Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. That he is like inflation of the highest order. His whole being is filled with the Spirit of God. Those wows. Well, it's called yes, and it's called How to Invite Old Nick In. Oh, there's something about you can make that feed the multitudes. That's psychological inflation. There are many people who think they're Jesus in the world today. Grow our consciousness, therapy, all that sort of. If we can grow our consciousness so that we become really self-aware, then we can grow our awareness to be in that state. Yes, I agree. I think that's hopefully what this is.
Well, I'll pass on a comment from Mary Van der Graaf. I'm sorry, Terry first. Okay,
I enjoyed very much, but you spoke about this notion of personality, of personness being very central, and I picked up the thought that as we continue to evolve, the end point of that will be some sort of personal outcome, and I was just reminded that that Tyre the Shadan saw the same sort of thing when he spoke about the cosmic Christ. That's the end point of evolution, the final end point of evolution. And the Kabbalist system has a similar idea of a godlike person that they called Adam Kadmon, that was the, if you like, the focus of the tree of life. They seem to be the same sort of thing, but what it highlights is that personness is critical to our evolutionary drive. That's what we're moving towards, and that personness will be the face of God. When God beholds God face to face, then the universe will pop back into non-existence because that's what it was set up for.
So we have a comment from Mary Vandergraaf here on Zoom relating to, sorry? Oh, yes, and here's Mary, yeah, who said, and I quote, "I believe we connect to land or our spiritual selves, not through the right-hand side of the brain, as the lady Ruth here indicated, but through our solar plexus."
Oh, okay.
That was Mary's comment.
Yeah. Well, my thing is, well, if I was working with Mary, I'd work with that.
Yes.
Because that obviously has meaning. Her insight can develop from the recognition that that part of her body contains something like that.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry, I had to mute on.
Yes.
Oh, too bad. Too bad.
My experience, they talk about me think, long bell belong me. So that's the vagus nerves traveling all that way on the big bundle. So your gut feeling, which we talk about, for them is the true brain. Fascinating.
Yeah, the solar plexus, in other words.
Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely amazing, right? And we finish up tonight, so it's splendid. Thank you. You've given us so much to think about. I think that spend a whole holidays reading all the books that you suggested. We look forward to hearing more about your wisdom circle.
I can try.
Specifically about how it's working. We have our last event for the year. It's our Christmas party on the 3rd of December here. Good. And for a luncheon. So if you, we really appreciate you coming along, and we'll let you know more about that. And if you're here in Canberra, you're very welcome too. Come along.
Thank you.
Around.
Keep an eye on the website for details. of that coming up in the first weekend of December?
In the last few years, we've had it here and it's been very successful because we have an in-house musician. We've got all the Christmas carols and everything organised now already. We've got a music book. Robert's compiled that. So next we'll be able to do lots of singing instead of you doing all the singing. That's our challenge. So I'd like to thank you. We've had an extraordinary year. We've got through the year with our really interesting guest speakers, and we've ended up with a brilliant guest speaker. So thank you very much.
Thanks. I thought I'd have to blow it up by now.
Amazing.
New roof.